Well, you're tuned in to Hawthorn University's Holistic Health and Nutrition webinar series. I want to thank you so much for joining us as we welcome back Hawthorn University's wonderful faculty advisor, Glen Depke, for his presentation on mitochondria. It's more than just the powerhouse of your cells. If you don't know Glenn, we're in for a treat. He's a traditional naturopath and has studied with many of the leaders in functional medicine over the last almost 20 years now, including Dr. Joseph Mercola. He's done this to fine-tune his own healing approach. He's earned degrees in natural health and traditional naturopathy and iridology, and he has really deservedly become known as a master in functional healing, especially in hormone health and customized nutrition, personalized keto, gut-brain immune connection, and food sensitivity. And of course, he champions the wonderful Depke Wellness Clinic. This is a great training upcoming here, and I expect that we're going to gain an understanding of the specific impact that mitochondria has on the body holistically, and we'll learn to identify and incorporate the supportive components of diet, lifestyle, and supplements that influence vitality so much. Glenn's also going to share his personal journey with mitochondrial health in the hopes that this may impact you and your clients positively as well. And we sure don't want you to miss a thing, so this presentation is being recorded. It'll be available for replay on our website in just a few days. And we'll likely go about 60 minutes for this presentation. We'll follow it with your questions and we'll answer your questions. Please put in your questions and any comments that you have into the webinar question panel. Do it as soon as you have it. You don't have to wait until the end. Then you're in queue and ready for that. Okay, I'm your host, Paula Bartholomew, and all that said, it's time to welcome you, Glenn.
Hello, it's always my pleasure to be here.
I'm grateful to have you with us again and presenting today, Glenn. So I don't want to hold anybody back. You've got a lot of information here, so when you're ready, are you ready? You can start.
I am ready. Well, thank you, Paula, and thank you everybody that's on here live, and for those watching the replay as well. And of course, the title of the presentation, Mitochondria, more than just the powerhouse of your cells. Now, before I get going, I do always like to give a special thanks out to Paula and James and all of Hawthorn University for providing this format and this avenue for us to really share this invaluable information for you. So my thanks always goes out to Hawthorn University. And myself, because you're looking at slides, I want you to get a little bit of a personal connection with me. So as Paula said, I'm a traditional naturopath, a speaker, author. I do have the Depke Wellness Clinic, and it's literally my pleasure to share this information for you to impact either your own life or the life of your friends, loved ones, or your clients as well. So what I really want to start with is, let's just think about this from your own perspective, and if you're a practitioner, think about it from also the perspective of the people who come into your clinic or that you're on the phone with, or nowadays doing video or virtual calls and consultations. But think of, well, what are the common symptoms and complaints that either you have for yourself or that you hear on a consistent basis? And I would say number one for me is just people being exhausted, people that are consistently and chronically tired all the time. They likely don't have a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, but they recognize that on a consistent basis, they don't have the energy to enjoy the day as they would like to enjoy it. Whether this be doing some menial task around the house, around the office, or maybe enjoying a granddaughter or a grandson, or taking care of something in the yard. But regardless of what this is, there's so many people who are living a life of fatigue. And what we're going to talk about today goes very deeply into fatigue, whether it be more acute or chronic as well. Another big challenge and complaint that I hear all the time, and I had to laugh within myself when I first put this picture on the slide, because I came up with a name that I never heard about before, and I after seeing this picture, I was thinking, oh, this is broken brain syndrome. And think about this from a brain perspective, and there's just so many people who don't have the mental clarity that they used to, and they think it's gone for good, or that you just can't regulate your mood that well anymore, or perhaps you just, when you read or study something, you just can't learn and comprehend as you did in the past. All these different symptoms tied into some level of neurological or brain imbalance, which is another common complaint that I hear all the time. And then also cardiovascular health. And it's, what's so interesting with cardiovascular health is that it's talked about so little nowadays as compared to it used to in the past, yet it's still one of the chief complaints and actually causes of death in our country. And one of the areas of cardiovascular health that is often misunderstood also is it's not just about having a heart attack or elevated blood pressure or some level of where your pulse is too high, but when your heart isn't working well, it also goes back into the first symptom I was talking about, which is fatigue. People who are typically dealing with cardiovascular issues are also dealing with chronic fatigue. And then outside of that, not that people walk in and complain about this or mention this as a symptom, but there's so many, I can see it in my clients, so many people are dealing with liver congestion on a consistent basis. And with liver congestion, this causes a host of challenges, anything from hormonal to nutritional challenges to detoxification issues, and the list really goes on. And another common issue, and because of the the high, I don't want to say likelihood, but the high incidence of liver congestion, it then puts a lot of pressure on the kidneys. And there's so many people that have kidney symptoms and challenges that, again, they don't walk into the office saying, oh, my kidneys hurt or my kidneys this, but we're seeing the end result of these symptoms and complaints with people in the clinic all the time. And there's one thing that ties into all of these, and this is what's so important about today's discussion, because all of these are tied directly into mitochondria. And this is what's important to understand, is that first off, from a very basic level, mitochondria is essential for approximately 96% of your body's energy. So when I was talking about fatigue and also talking about how the cardiovascular issues can lead to fatigue, a huge impact is tied into mitochondria health. And then your mitochondria is not only essential for energy, as I'm talking about on this level, but it's also essential for the high energy needs of your body, which includes your heart, which is the one area, when we talk about mitochondria also, when we talk about this, it's usually referred to tied into heart health. So that's the one area that a lot of people will have an understanding, but there's other high energy areas of the body, and one of those being your liver, another being your kidneys, and then another being your brain. So just remember that, and if you're taking notes, this is a good thing to write down. So when you think of mitochondria, number one, think of 96% of your energy, think of your brain health, think of your heart health, think of your liver health, and think of your kidney health when you think of mitochondria. And really, what I would say is the most common definition of mitochondria, it's basically known as the powerhouse of the cell. And the mitochondria are primarily responsible for converting the air that you breathe and the food that you eat into energy, basically so your cells can use this to grow, divide, and to function. And when we think of the mitochondria, most of your cells, and this is an astounding statistic that almost seems unbelievable, but this is the truth, is that most of your cells contain several hundred mitochondria, these little powerhouses that supply the majority of the fuel and energy that your body produces. Again, as I mentioned before, about 96%. And these cellular powerhouses create energy in the form of ATP, basically from the food you eat combined with the oxygen that you get as you breathe in. And as mentioned earlier, the tissues in your body that are more power hungry, like your heart, your brain, your kidneys, your liver, and also your muscles have more mitochondria to help meet their needs than other areas of your body. And you basically, you need plenty of healthy mitochondria to provide your body and organs with the fuel or energy they need to function properly. Yeah, we'll be talking about this a little bit later. It's almost like an anti-aging aspect. And when we start to deplete our mitochondria function, we start to age quicker. So I'm always in the place, I would much rather age slower, or maybe even turn it around, to be completely blunt. And also with mitochondria, in the process of meeting your body's energy needs, your cells and your mitochondria, they actually do pay a steep price. You see, to understand the intense energy producing process, it basically creates these byproducts known as reactive oxygen species, and we'll acronym of ROS. So this excessive ROS can damage your cells and your mitochondrial DNA and make your organs age faster. So as you age, your levels of damage from mitochondria dysfunction rise and your body's natural defenses weaken. And this is another important aspect, with everything that we're dealing with in our, not just our country and our world right now, with this exposure to the virus. And this isn't just for something going on right now. I mean, we've been exposed to multiple other viruses in the past, and there will be other viruses in the future. And you always want to keep your natural body's defenses at their strength rather than their weakness. And mitochondria plays another important role there, because it gets back into, and I'm going to purposely go on just a slight little tangent here with this too, is it goes back into the difference between the person that most people haven't heard of, a gentleman named Bechamp, as compared to Louis Pasteur. And because Pasteur's germ theory was based on the theory or the idea that the problem that people are dealing with is tied into what germ or virus or what pathogen you're exposed to. Whereas Bechamp, at the same time in history, he had a different theory, and it was a cellular theory, and the theory was more of, it wasn't about the germ, it was about the strength of the cells and the strength of the body and the strength of your immune system. And for whatever reason, back in those days, maybe Pasteur was a better speaker, or had a better influence, or maybe he was better at building rapport, or maybe he just had a better influence of friends, or whatever that may be. But for whatever reason, Pasteur won that argument, that disagreement between the germ theory and the cellular theory, and more of about being the host. And I tend to agree with what Bechamp had expressed back hundreds of years ago, that it's really about your cells. It's really about you. It's really about your immune system. And anything you could do to keep yourself stronger goes a long way in protecting you from anything that you're potentially exposed to. And mitochondria plays a significant role in that process. Now, also with mitochondria. So the net result from faulty mitochondria can affect, and not just can, will affect your health and performance. And this brings us to the researchers' bottom line discovery about your mitochondria, is they believe that most health issues start with the breakdown of the cell's mitochondria. But it seems like on a level that you go down this path of people having symptoms and challenges and complaints, and you start to learn about how basically the body begins to shut down on a deeper cellular level. But there is really good news for everybody, is that mitochondria breakdown to dysfunction are reversible in early stages. And I'll even go a little bit further than that. They're reversible even in moderate to later stages as well. It just depends on really, the earlier the stages, the less intense your protocols would be to turn this around, as compared to somebody who's in late stage mitochondria breakdown. This could take a number of years to really help balance, and it would be more likely a complete holistic approach, where it's a complete lifestyle change. It's a complete focus on what are the supplements that actually help improve this. And it may even tie into other organ systems and functional systems in your body. It may be not just thinking about mitochondria health and lifestyle and supplements, but you might be looking at deeper levels of hormone health, different levels of gut-brain immune connective issues, and so many other factors. So it's always better to pick things up earlier, or I'll go even one step further. It's always better to prevent rather than to get into an area of dysfunction and have to turn it around. And the other parts of the good news, there are certain nutrients and lifestyle choices that may offer really potent protection from damage and dysfunction tied into your mitochondria. And the permanent DNA damage in the cell may not occur until, well into a decade after the first signs of age-related mitochondrial damage appear. But again, this ties into even our understandings within quantum physics and tied into DNA. It used to be thought that DNA was the end all, and if there was a DNA issue, there was no impact that you can make. But now we understand, based on really just furthering our knowledge and understanding within science and physics, is that your DNA can change, because there's something called epigenetics that have to turn on a genetic SNP in your DNA, and epigenetics can also turn that SNP off. So I want you to understand that when we say DNA damage, even now that I'm looking at this, I probably would have even eliminated the permanent DNA, because permanent DNA doesn't have to be permanent. It's just something that takes a much higher level of focus and intention and what you're doing to turn that around. And let's think about really overall benefits of healthy mitochondria, because it goes so much further than just your energy, just your heart, your brain, your kidneys, and your liver, because this goes into so many other areas. And these are areas that most people, and perhaps yourself, even as you're looking at the slide before I get into it, you're thinking, well, yeah, those all sound like a good idea for me. And think about this. Just think for yourself personally. Would you enjoy improved mental clarity? When you're eating your food, would you enjoy freedom from cravings? Would you enjoy living into a very positive preventive anti-cancer strategy? Would you enjoy positive microbiome changes? So the microbiome, which is the beneficial bacteria that's actually inside your gastrointestinal system, not only for your body to digest and absorb and assimilate your foods properly, but also recognizing that wholeness of the gut-brain immune connection. So the microbiome is very important at so many levels. And how about with healthy mitochondria, losing weight without deprivation, where you don't have to be trying to starve yourself, which is really honestly not a great idea to begin with. And of course, the number one thing that we started off at the very beginning of this presentation is greatly improved energy, another benefit of healthy mitochondria. And then the one that I have to usually explain a little bit is increased insulin sensitivity. And what I mean by this is the insulin sensitivity is the insulin's ability to help regulate the excess glucose and move it out of your blood and into the cells. Very often what happens when people start to develop these issues with blood sugar and the insulin's you start to develop insulin resistance, because there's trouble moving the glucose from the blood into the cell. But healthier mitochondria will help to increase that insulin sensitivity to better regulate your glucose. Also, reducing inflammation. I can tell you hands down, from a functional perspective, working with clients in the last, over 19 years now, that inflammatory conditions, chronic systemic inflammatory conditions, are probably one of the single biggest triggers for so many other chronic disease states. And having healthy mitochondria helps to reduce inflammation by encouraging your healthy, natural anti-inflammatory response. Also, this is one of those interesting aspects, is that the healthier your mitochondria, the better your mitochondria biogenesis, so which is the reproduction of mitochondria in the cells of your body. And also for people who are enjoying the benefits of the ketogenic diet and all of the benefits tied into that, which are very similar to mitochondria benefits. The healthier your mitochondria, also the better the influence on ketones. And if you're not familiar with what ketones are, these are little fat droplets that are primarily produced in the liver that provide energy when your body doesn't have carbohydrates to break down for energy, which is a very positive thing. This is not ketoacidosis. It's very different, even though they have similar names. But when you are producing these ketones, it's not just for a supply of fuel when you don't have carbohydrates. It's also the understanding is that when you break down fat for fuel, which is what a ketone is, a little fat droplet, you actually enjoy about 6 to 7 times more energy than burning carbs for fuel, and it's a much cleaner energy because when you burn carbs for fuel, there's more free radical damage and oxidative stress, and as you're going to hear in a little bit today, it's that free radical damage and oxidative stress, which also has a negative impact on your mitochondria. So when you break down and use fat for fuel, there's not as much free radical activity and oxidative stress. So not only do you get more energy, but it's less of a detriment to your body as well. And the big thing is who's at risk. Right now, if you're over 30 years old, there's a strong likelihood that you would be at risk of mitochondria dysfunction or less than optimal levels of mitochondria. If you have a physically demanding lifestyle, it's another significant risk factor, and this could be tied into work, or it could be tied into some lifestyle choices that you make for yourself. Or another risk factor, do you eat according to the SAD diet, the acronym also known as the Standard American Diet, a diet high in sugar, processed foods, caffeine, and alcohol? Do you also, perhaps you feel that you're under significant mental and emotional stress on a regular basis? Or perhaps a little bit deeper, you're dealing with the suppression of emotional traumas that have occurred in your past. Right now in with the situation going on in our country, there's so many people that are living under mental and emotional stress on a consistent basis. And the downfall of that, and this is a big difference between the word caution and the word fear. I mean, caution is something that's very positive, because when you're cautious, it means you're learning about something new, you're understanding what's going on, you understand all the pros and cons of the information you're being provided, and then you make lifestyle choices based on what you think is most important. Like, it's really great to be cautious. It's a very positive thing, but fear kind of locks us up, but it doesn't just lock us up from movement on every other level, but when you're in a constant state of fear, that also puts you at risk for mitochondria dysfunction. Also, another aspect of this, family history of brain disorders, cardiovascular disease, and or liver or kidney concerns. And I'll in a little bit later today, I'm going to tell you about the personal family history that I deal with and why mitochondria function is so important for me specifically. And also, you're at risk if you're taking a statin for elevated cholesterol, because the cholesterol, the working mechanism of a statin is it impacts the liver. And the liver is where your body produces cholesterol basically in every cell in the body, but the primary amount of cholesterol is produced in your liver. And the way a statin works is it works based on the liver, but it doesn't just shut down the production of cholesterol. It also shuts down the production and the biogenesis within the something called CoQ10, which we'll talk about later, which then plays a role down this mitochondria pathway. So it's not just if you're taking a statin, but if you're on any of these other drugs, these are also risk factors. So if you're on acid blockers, allergy medications, antacid, antibiotics, antidepressants, blood thinners, this whole list goes on. So I want you to just take a look at this list and think to yourself, am I taking any of these, including a statin, which then is another risk factor for me having some level of mitochondria dysfunction. And before we get into the what what can you do? I want to share a little bit of my personal story that might help you understand how this is so much more than just energy and with heart health. So down this perspective, just a little bit of history with my family. My grandmother on my mother's side, she died with dementia. I remember just being a young boy in my house, and one day I was just told that grandma's going to move in with us. And I didn't think anything of it. And back in that day, I mean, I was born in 1964. And back in those days, at least in my family, you didn't regularly talk about health issues with grandma or what was going on. I know that our world is much different now for most people than it was back then, but that was the world that I lived in and how my family interacted. But I didn't really know why grandma was moving in with us, but I can remember one time in the middle of the night, maybe 2, 3 in the morning, being woken up by hearing a rustling out in the hallway. And I go out there and there's grandma kind of aimlessly walking the hallway, no clothes on, doesn't know who I am, doesn't know where she is, and doesn't know, who she is. And again, grandma died with severe dementia. And then my mother, who passed, I think we're going on either 5 or 6 years now, but my mother was also diagnosed with dementia. My mother spent the last 13 months of her life laying in a hospital bed in my parents' living room with my father feeding her baby food and changing her diapers every day. She lived in that way for 13 months, and my mother finally moved on, again, with the diagnosis of dementia. And then my older brother, who in his late 50s was diagnosed with some type of a speech disorder. And we didn't live in the same, we both lived at that time in the state of California, but my brother lived in the northern part of California. I lived in southern. So we didn't have like regular conversations, but when we did have conversations, he didn't feel that the speech disorder was really even important enough to bring up to me, because he was told by his doctor he just had to uh, get into this speech therapy, and then there was a certain prescription drug they gave them, and according to the doctors, everything was going to be okay. But then about a year and a half after that initial diagnosis, again, without me knowing anything about this, then my brother was re-diagnosed. He was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And hopefully nobody listening knows about ALS firsthand because of a friend or a loved one. But if if you've heard anything about ALS, I mean, generally from the time you're diagnosed with it until the end of life is about a 2-year time period. And here my brother was 2 years into really a misdiagnosis. And what was interesting with my brother is, of course, once he had a diagnosis of ALS, he very quickly contacted me, and so I could be of whatever service and assistance I could to my brother. And what was so interesting about this is I really feel that if I would have recognized that my brother had this going on sooner, I believe he would still be alive today. Because when we started looking at the things that what was really going on for my brother, and started looking at functional lab testing, his hormones were in really bad shape. He had multiple pathogens in his gastrointestinal tract. He was loaded with mercury, a known neurotoxin, and he was sensitive from a food sensitivity perspective. He was sensitive to gluten, dairy, and corn, all of which he probably ate every day. We can guarantee, based on everything he was dealing with, that his mitochondria were significantly dysfunctional and depleted, and dealing with a deep level of mitochondria imbalance and dysfunction. And had we known that, as I said earlier, I believe he would be alive today. So for me, I always say that I very selfishly research brain health, because, and I say that very candidly, because with my family history, brain health is a path that could be, it would be probably very easy for me to drop into some level of neurodegeneration, some kind of a brain type of a disorder. But I'm committed to having a healthy brain the rest of my life. And that brought me into the understanding of mitochondria and brain health, which is, and when we get into talking about dosing later, I'll share how much I take of certain nutrients and supplements to actually assist with my mitochondria. And I take it, mostly to make sure I maintain a happy and healthy brain. Now, do I enjoy the benefits of 96% of my energy? Do I enjoy the benefits of heart health and liver health and kidney health and everything else that we've talked about today? Absolutely. But I do this for my brain. So I want you to think, for yourself or for your friends or loved ones or maybe clients in your practice, what can you do to help yourself or to help others? So I'm going to give a list of different areas where you can actually have a significant impact on your mitochondria health. And again, to be candid, I do most of this myself because of my family history. So you can help by increasing your total number of mitochondria in your cells by exercising. And the better exercise for this specific factor in increase in number of mitochondria is the high intensity interval exercise is especially beneficial. And this is something that I don't talk about this just from a mitochondria perspective. When I'm dealing with clients who have significant challenges with their hormone health, recognizing that one of the hormones produced in your adrenal glands on the whole of your HPA axis is actually cortisone, which is your body's natural anti-inflammatory. And the high intensity exercise is not only beneficial for the mitochondria, but it's also beneficial for your hormonal system, which then ends up being beneficial for inflammation as well. So this goes down a deeper level for so many others. Now, because of the impact of mental and emotional stress on the body and on the mitochondria specifically, if you can create habits of deep belly breathing, prayer and or meditation on a consistent basis, whatever it is that resonates most with you to really help to calm your nervous system. Because when you calm your nervous system, you're triggering the parasympathetic response of your nervous system, which is the rest and digest side of your nervous system, as compared to the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight end of your nervous system. So that's the area that has a negative impact on mitochondria when you're in constant sympathetic states. And the one easy thing that everybody can do is the deep belly breathing. If you wanted to meditate or pray, I would say add that in as well, whichever resonates more with you individually. But the deep belly breathing, a simple fact is that you cannot deep belly breathe and be stressed out at the same time, because they're both two opposite ends of your autonomic nervous system. A deep belly breath or deep belly breathing specifically triggers a parasympathetic response, and the stress response is the sympathetic response. So if you're stressed out, take like 3 to 5 really good deep belly breaths and just allow your body to find its balance from that parasympathetic response, which is also then going to help with your mitochondria. Right. Another important factor is achieving proper sleep nightly. And when I say proper sleep, it's not just about the time and duration of your sleep. Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb is approximately 8 hours of sleep is fantastic. Some people can do fine on just a little bit less than that, and some people need a little bit more. So find where your sweet spot is. But it's not just about the duration of your sleep, it's the time of your sleep. Recognizing that your sleep patterns are all regulated by circadian rhythms, which are hormonal fluctuations that go throughout your day, which are tied into nature. They're tied into the sun rising and setting. They're tied into magnetic shifts and pulls of the earth as it rotates on its axis. So if you want to think of the prime times to sleep, first think of waking up. The prime time to wake up would be about the time the sun is coming up, which is going to vary from season to season, depending on where you're living, of course, as far as how intense that change is going to be. And then back that up approximately 8 hours. So if the sun is coming up at 6:30, well then be in bed at 10:30. That's going to be your 8 hours. And the only thing that I'll add with this is that typically we need a little bit more sleep in the winter months for just better balance in the body. So in the winter months, if you're normally sleeping 8, maybe in the winter you're sleeping 8.5, getting a little bit more sleep, but always trying to get up as close to the sun getting up as possible to optimize your sleep pattern. Also, healthy sun exposure is very positive for mitochondria. And what I mean by healthy sun exposure is exposing as much of your body that you can during the prime times of sun exposure, which are about 11:30 to 1:30, which, ironically, are the times we're typically told to stay out of the sun, right? But the key, though, is to get healthy sun exposure, not overexposure. So if your skin is starting to turn a little pink, that would be overexposure. And really gauge this also on your skin tone. If you have very, very light and white skin, you might need all of 10 minutes in the sun to have what we consider healthy sun. If you have more of a olive tone skin, more of a moderate skin tone, you might need 20, 30 minutes of sun. Or if you have very, very dark complexion, you might need more than 30 minutes to be considered this healthy sun exposure. But again, be sure to maintain that healthy exposure. Another great lifestyle thing that you can do is the ketogenic diet done properly and personalized for you. And I say done properly because when things start to become a craze in our country, we tend to, as a whole, start to change the rules on the game of what it is, and really just with recognition. And I know I've done some presentations on a ketogenic diet that are in the archives with Hawthorn University, so I would welcome you to go back and perhaps listen to those to have more in-depth information. But a good general rule of thumb with the ketogenic diet is to recognize that you're eating very small to moderate amounts of protein, low net carbs, so I would say at least 50 net carbs per day or less, and then a moderate to generous amount of fat. But it's not about eating all the fat you want or eating all the protein you want. This is not the Atkins diet from 10, 20 years ago. It's about eating lower protein, low net carb, and a more generous amount of fat. And to go a step further, and this presentation is really centered around mitochondria. So again, if you go back in the archives of Hawthorn University, when I talked about the ketogenic diet, also talking about personalizing it for you. So that's some deeper information that you can find out as well. And then intermittent fasting. And intermittent fasting is often tied into the ketogenic diet for so many people. But there's two things I want to bring up with intermittent fasting as well. Well, I guess three, because first I want to define it. So intermittent fasting is where you're giving yourself anywhere from 13 to 16 hours from dinner the night before to your first meal the next day. So as example, if you ate at 6 p.m. on dinner on Monday, if you're going to do intermittent fasting, you'll go at least 13 hours, so you wouldn't have your next meal until at least 7 a.m. the next day, or preferably on closer up to 10 a.m. So we can define that as intermittent fasting, but there's two caveats with this. Number one is if you're intermittent fasting and you find that you're getting very depleted, maybe depleted energetically or mentally, emotionally. But if you're getting depleted with intermittent fasting, it could be a deeper hormonal issue, and don't just push through this. So just if you're doing intermittent fasting and you're crashing and burning, have a snack. Have half an avocado with some Himalayan salt on it. Have a handful of olives. Have some kind of a snack to keep yourself going. And the other thing with intermittent fasting, and this is a very interesting aspect, is even if you're not on the ketogenic diet, you can actually still have significant benefits to your mitochondria and your health with intermittent fasting. I mean, I've read some really astounding research that shows even if you don't change your diet, if you eat the same diet today as you did yesterday, and let's just say that diet wasn't what you would consider optimal, if you start intermittent fasting and reach that 16-hour plateau, where you have 16 hours where you're not eating and you have all of your consumption of food in an 8-hour window in your day, even if you don't change what you eat, there's a significant benefit for your mitochondria and for your health. So another little tidbit of information there for you. Now, also tied into nutrition, some food sources of CoQ10. I'm going to talk about CoQ10 in a bit as one of the precursors to mitochondria. Organ meats, so these are all food sources of CoQ10. Organ meats such as heart, liver, or kidney. Some muscle meats, pork, beef, and chicken, obviously the highest quality of those that you can get, as well as fatty fish, trout, herring, mackerel, and sardine are good examples. And again, wild caught, highest quality. Vegetables, 3 vegetables that are higher on the list would be spinach, cauliflower, and broccoli, preferably organic, of course. Fruits, the 2 fruits that are higher on this list would be oranges and strawberries. Legumes, soybeans. I do want to say if you're eating soybeans, I always say only eat soybeans if you know they're organic and non-GMO. But then also lentils and peanuts would be better food sources of CoQ10. And then nuts and seeds, sesame seeds and pistachios as well. And then outside of that, what can you do from a supplement perspective to boost your mitochondria? There's, I don't, again, to be candid, I don't take everything on this list, but I wanted to give you the list of what are all good options to boost your mitochondria. And it's not like you're going to go and start taking 10 or 12 different supplements tomorrow to boost your mitochondria, but I'm going to give you a list of everything that's important and some that I use specifically because of my family history. I'll make some notes of that. Magnesium. Well, let me just start by saying three minerals that are very important down the mitochondria pathway: magnesium, selenium, and zinc. With magnesium, even to understand it, it's suggested that about 85% of our culture is deficient in magnesium. The U.S., the soil is very often very low in selenium, therefore we end up with selenium deficiencies. And zinc, about 1 of 3 people, so about 33%, are deficient in zinc. And I will occasionally cycle on and off selenium and zinc, but the one that I take on a consistent basis is magnesium. And I take that also as a secondary benefit for my brain health. And I use a form of magnesium called L-threonate that has been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier and specifically help the brain as well. Also, a couple of strong products down the path of antioxidants with alpha-lipoic acid and liposomal glutathione. These are also very supportive for mitochondria because, as mentioned before, you know, when you're under these levels of stress to your body, whether it be mental, emotional stress, or any other stressor, stress of inflammation, stress of toxicity in your body, whether it be environmental, chemical, or heavy metal toxicity, having potent antioxidants play a big role in helping your mitochondria. Now, I specifically, where I have glutathione down there, I did put the word in front of it, liposomal. I only recommend that when you're taking a glutathione supplement to make sure it's liposomal, because non-liposomal glutathione has a very low absorption rate, but in a liposomal form, the absorption rate goes much higher. And why glutathione specifically is because it is, I consider it your body's primary antioxidant. And just by having adequate levels of glutathione in your body, that also enhances every other antioxidant that you take in, either through a supplement or a nutritional form. So it benefits multiple pathways. One thing that I take on a daily basis, it's berberine and micronized PQQ. This is interesting from a mitochondria perspective because the berberine aspect of this is kind of like a garbage truck for your mitochondria. Just imagine that this little truck backs up to your mitochondria, opens up the back, and the mitochondria gets to dump all of its garbage, trash, and debris into the garbage truck, and it takes it away. So the berberine acts to clean that out. When I'm working with clients, I refer to it as a cellular acidity, which is basically dirty mitochondria. And then the micro PQQ has an effect on the body where it's like having a campfire in front of you. And in one hand, you've got a can of lighter fluid, and the micronized PQQ is the can of lighter fluid you're spraying on the fire. And you know what's going to happen to the fire if you spray lighter fluid on it. It's going to become more intense. It's going to grow in size. It's going to change colors, heat, temperature. I mean, all these things are going to change. That's the effect that micronized PQQ has on your mitochondria. And the micronized aspect of this is very important because regular PQQ that's non-micronized only lasts in your body about 2 hours, whereas micronized PQQ lasts about 8 or 9 hours in your body. So I'd much rather have my mitochondria being enhanced for a long period of time through the day rather than a short period. And I'll even tell you a little side note on this is, you know how when you do something new in your life, and there's very often there's the one thing that made you decide to do this. There's that that's that one level of when I found this information out, that's what made me commit to this. And with the berberine and micro PQQ, I already understood the benefits of the berberine and the benefits of the PQQ. But when I actually found some research about how the combination of berberine and micro PQQ, when they took cells and they looked at cells prior to using this and then after, that the cells actually appeared to be younger cells. And when I heard the words the younger cells, I was like, sign me up. And I've had fantastic responses with the berberine and micro PQQ from an energetic standpoint, from the level of I guess I'll give you a little history with this. I'm a very busy individual. I've got a private practice. I do a lot of traveling throughout the, well, not as much right now, obviously, with travel, but I do travel a lot with doing different trainings and such throughout the country. And I've got a lot of personal hobbies, a wife, 2 big dogs. I'm just a busy guy, and I tend to burn the candle at both ends in the middle sometimes. And there'd be times when I'd be doing things, and I might outwardly look like I've got it all together, my energy is good. But in the past, there were times where even if all of that seemed good, I would just still be like exhausted at the core. And the one thing that's happened for me since taking the berberine and micro PQQ, I never feel that exhausted at the core anymore, which is something that's been life-changing for me in a very positive perspective. So other supplements that are important, and then this next one, omega-3s, isn't just important for mitochondrial health. You know, getting your good quality omega-3s is important for overall holistic health. I also use something called H2, which is a molecular hydrogen. What I love about hydrogen, because it actually can get to every cell in your body, even across the blood-brain barrier, and it doesn't have a dependency on anything else. You can do nothing different in your life but take H2, and it has very strong antioxidant benefits. So that's another antioxidant aspect. Your B vitamins are important for mitochondria. L-carnitine is important for mitochondria. Something like a liposomal vitamin C, again, from an antioxidant perspective. And then the two of the bigger out of this group would be the ubiquinol, which is also known as, more likely known as CoQ10, or my favorite, ubiquinol, which is a further broken down form of ubiquinone, or the CoQ10, which is more readily used by the mitochondria. So more on what you could do. All right, so for those that are over 30, because you're typically dealing with a diminished intrinsic factor. And what that means to you is if you have a diminished intrinsic factor, it's more difficult for your body to convert the CoQ10 into ubiquinol. So that's why if you're over 30, I always say ubiquinol is preferred over CoQ10. Ubiquinol is my go-to from a mitochondria perspective that I use every day, and I'll talk a little bit deeper about that shortly. If you are using CoQ10, preferably that would be used if you're 30 or under, and liposomal is preferred if you have availability for liposomal CoQ10. And I always do say don't use, the thing to not use is a powdered form of CoQ10. Sometimes you'll see these capsules of powdered CoQ10. The absorption rate is really low, and it depends on consuming a high level of fat. So if you're having a high fat meal, maybe you're getting some level of absorption of this, but if you don't have a liposomal form of CoQ10 and you're under 30, gel cap is preferred over a powdered capsule. But in my office as well as personally, I use Ubiquinol, and I use it in a Lee cap as opposed to a soft gel. So the picture on the left there is a Lee cap. These are hard capsule that is hermetically heat sealed, and it's got that little bubble in there is a nitrogen bubble to preserve the freshness. And Ubiquinol, and the reason why this is important is because Ubiquinol is unstable. And when you expose ubiquinol to oxygen, this converts the ubiquinol back into ubiquinone, which is CoQ10. So this is very important because there's so many people that take ubiquinol, but they're taking it not in a lead cap, and it's being exposed to oxygen, and it's converting back into the CoQ10. So you're really not, and this is the kicker on this. If you're taking ubiquinol because you understand that, okay, I'm at the age where maybe my intrinsic factor doesn't allow me to convert CoQ10 into ubiquinol anymore, so then you buy and purchase ubiquinol, but if it converts back into CoQ10, you're back in the same boat you were in the beginning. And in the next slide, we'll just describe this a little bit deeper. And I will say that the most reputable brand of ubiquinol is from a company called Kanika. Probably most of the supplements companies that I see on the market use Kanika as the most reputable brand of ubiquinol that I've ever seen. So here's the big difference. This is why I take ubiquinol in the lead cap as compared to a soft gel. The picture on the right is looking at a soft gel underneath a microscope. And you can see those white lines and the depth and the darkness between the white lines, and those are cracks in the soft gel. So when something is in a soft gel, it does have cracks in this. And when there's cracks in there, even though these are microscopic cracks, it does allow oxygen to penetrate the soft gel and get to the internal ingredients of the soft gel. So in the case with ubiquinol, if you're taking ubiquinol in a soft gel, once you open that cap and you break the seal and it's no longer air sealed and you expose oxygen to the ubiquinol in the soft gels, it's just a matter of time before it starts to get through the cracks. And when it gets through the cracks, well, then you're, again, remember, it's a very unstable molecule. So you're going to convert that ubiquinol back into ubiquinol, back into CoQ10. Whereas the picture on the left, that's a picture of a Lee cap under a microscope. So the Lee cap, you'll notice that there aren't any cracks in this, so you're not worried about the oxygen. And as I mentioned with this picture here on the left from this earlier slide, it's also a low heat, hermetically sealed, and it's got the nitrogen bubble in there to preserve the freshness, which is that's the main reason why if anybody who's a client in my practice, you know that I only sell ubiquinol in Lee caps, and that's all I take personally myself. If you do happen to take ubiquinol in a soft gel, buy small quantities in the bottles. If you can get a 30 gel cap or soft gel cap, or maybe maximum 60 to where you know you're going to go through them rather quickly, then there's less likelihood it'll get through the cracks and make that conversion before you are using your ubiquinol. And then another question I often get is, how much ubiquinol do I need? So this is a great little chart here for you. So if you're under 30 years old, you probably don't have a high need for this. So just 100 milligrams on a daily basis would be supportive for the typical lifestyle that most people are going to have. Because if we think back to like the risk factors of people who are, they've got a lot of physical demands on their body, they're under a lot of mental and emotional stress. I mean, these different factors, different histories of challenges with health in the family, whether it be cardiovascular, liver, kidney, or brain. But 100 milligrams, if you're younger, is usually going to do the trick to be supportive. If you're 30 years or older, regardless of other challenges, I would at least be taking 200 milligrams per day. Now, if you do have a history of heart health and you want to support your heart health, as well as if you're on statins, then the low-end therapeutic dose, which with almost every piece of research out there, the low-end therapeutic dose is 300 milligrams or more. If you're dealing with and have levels of concern with your brain health, whether it be like me, where there was just a family history of neurodegenerative disorders, or maybe you're noticing some of the early signs of neurodegeneration yourself. Maybe you don't have the mental clarity anymore. Maybe your memory and comprehension don't work like they are, and you're not thinking as quickly and clearly as you did in the past. At least 200 milligrams would be recommended. And if you have an active lifestyle, as I mentioned, that is something that I do. I tend to burn the candles a candle at both ends and in the middle sometimes. So 300 milligrams would be recommended, and the initial dosing would be 300 milligrams for a couple of weeks, and then you would drop your dose down depending on what's going on in your body. But for me personally, I told you I'd share what I do. I take 450 milligrams of ubiquinol every day. And I do this because I've got multiple risk factors. I have a physical demanding life. I have a lot of potential mental and emotional stress that would come upon my life on a regular basis. And I've got that strong history of neurological degeneration in my family and a moderate history of heart cardiovascular challenges in my family. And based on iridology, there's a potential genetic weakness for kidneys for me. So I do all of this to make sure that that all stays happy and healthy. And again, the dosing, I've seen people who take much higher doses based on a lot of people with really significant heart health issues. I've seen people taking doses as high as like 1,200 milligrams on a daily basis. But this gives you a little bit of an outline of what would be important for you, along with some of the potential other supportive nutrients that were mentioned earlier. So wrapping this up with really your mitochondria health. Remember, your mitochondria are little powerhouses that supply the majority of the fuel and energy that your body produces. Like that and alone says it all. Faulty mitochondria will affect your health and performance. Mitochondrial breakdown and dysfunction are reversible in their early stages, and they're even reversible in more moderate and later stages. There's usually a lot more you're taking care of than just mitochondria at that point. There's just so many other outlying factors. Be sure to follow your lifestyle tips, get the sleep, get the high intensity exercise, get proper sun exposure. We talked about the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting to promote mitochondria health, and then following your nutritional recommendations. For me, the things that I do, I take the ubiquinol, as I mentioned earlier. I take 450 milligrams a day because there's a lot of potential risk factors for me. So I take a higher amount. I take the berberine and micro PQQ every day because I want to enhance my mitochondria and clean it out on a regular basis. And I go back and forth between the liposomal glutathione and the molecular hydrogen, the H2. For different reasons. They both have antioxidant effects, but I like what they both do on an individual basis. So I just go back and forth between one and the other. And the minerals, like for me, I take magnesium, consistently. And as I mentioned earlier, 85% of the people in our country are potentially magnesium deficient. So that's a big factor there. And the zinc and selenium, I just kind of I go on and off of that. I don't feel like I need it all the time. My diet's pretty good, and I'm going to get some of those minerals in just from a dietary perspective. So that wraps us up there on what we were talking about today. I also want to provide information if you have questions or comments that go outside of the realm of you watching live and being able to ask questions. So if you're watching the replay, that's the 800 number for my office, and that is my direct email, glen@depkewellness.com, and you can also reach me on facebook.com, and it's pretty easy to remember. Depke Wellness for the World is my Facebook page. And of course, always a disclaimer that this presentation is based on opinions of myself and Depke Wellness. And really what this says is that these statements are not evaluated by the FDA. Nothing on here is meant to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. And basically, this is to provide information. As always, whether it be from me or from anybody, when you're getting information, do your research, see how it feels to you, and move forward on what you feel is important to you. I think that's the way to really take control of your health. And of course, lastly, a big thank you for being here today to listen to something that I'm very passionate about, which is tied into mitochondria because of the impact that this has on your health overall. And of course, lastly, with the presentation specifically, before we get into Q&A, a great shout out and thank you to Paula and James and the whole family at Hawthorn University for providing the ability for me to share this information with you personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Another really well put together presentation, so well organized and explained. And I think it really helped to have your personal history
Mm.
explained and introduced. And I just really want to acknowledge the vulnerability that took to be so revealing on a
Yes.
personal level. But
Yeah.
I think that it helped tie together and see the importance, because we can, many of us see these kind of conditions in our own family patterns. So helps us reflect on ourselves a little bit differently.
Yes, yes, and you're welcome for that. And it's you know the way I always look at it, Paula, is that if I go through something and I share it, it really for people it kind of makes it real and me real to a lot of people, because it's I've had people in the past in my clinic, say, well, you don't understand. You've never really had this or that. And, and Paul, my history, but not everybody does. I used to be epileptic and I used to have
Sure.
grand mal seizures on medications. And,
Yeah.
so I'm the first to understand that, the things go wrong and you can fix them. So I like to be the example of that.
Yeah, you are. And thank you for those additional revelations too. All right, let's go to some questions. Early in the presentation, you were talking about various symptoms that people experience personally, specifically energy of feeling exhausted and all the broken brain issues, fog, mood, learning abilities, retention. But when you spoke about cardiovascular health, I wonder really how that shows up. If somebody's, say, young male in their 40s exercises, but consistently blood tests come back with high cholesterol, low HDL, high LDL, and high triglycerides. So how would you know from looking at a blood test like that it might be mitochondrial related?
Well, I think the bigger thing from, and I can think of a friend that I knew that I had always, and I wasn't working with him, he wasn't a client of mine, it was just a friend. And when we would go and do something strenuous, like go for a hike, I would always recognize that it was harder for him to maintain his wind, and he would always sweat profusely, almost
Hmm.
excessively. And and that is one of those early signs. The extreme fatigue is another early sign, or constant like
Yes.
dizziness or lightheadedness, or a
Hmm.
fast heart rate. Where somebody consistently has a heart rate more than 100 beats per minute, or a new or regular heartbeat that wasn't really recognized before. And sometimes even a symptom like some kind of a chest discomfort during activity that goes away when you rest, or as I said, that
Hmm.
we've given that example, my friend, difficulty breathing during activities.
Hmm.
So those are all early signs of just general warning signs and symptoms of cardiovascular disease.
Okay. But you would tie it into mitochondria. I mean, every time when you're seeing something like
Yeah,
an acute or a deepening acute situation
absolutely. Yeah,
that it's
because it's
cardiovascular related or others, like you always look to mito.
yes, exactly. Yeah, and because there's so many, because when we think, in the presentation, when we think of the risk factors, I mean, we're almost saying that we're all at a risk factor for poor mitochondria health, based on the lifestyle that we live here in our country. And it's true though.
Hmm.
So when we start to have symptoms that go outside of just those general symptoms, like we're talking here with cardiovascular health, I think a great place to look is well, let's support mitochondria and see how those symptoms change.
Hmm. Yeah, really well done. Nice. And you spoke about genetics and our SNPs and ability to turn cells on and off. Would you recommend genetic testing in general, or if there's mitochondrial dysfunction specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I like genetic testing. I don't.
Mhm.
The one thing I say, and a lot of times the most popular, obviously, the 23andMe is what so many people use,
Mhm.
there's a lot of it that's not quite understood. There's a lot of
Mhm.
these DNA strands that we don't have a deep understanding. I know there's a lot of really deep and accurate information down the liver, different liver phase 1 and phase 2 liver
Mhm.
detoxification
Mhm.
pathways, and our
Mhm.
information is growing on this all the time. But I think of the
Sure.
genetic testing as it's a guide. It's not,
Mhm.
the place where I think it's potentially challenging is that a lot of times if people do genetic testing, then they get attached to their problem. And what the genetic testing says can actually be an easier manifestation because we're focusing on what's wrong, which then triggers that
Mhm.
sympathetic response, which then goes
Right.
against what I was talking about with the champ, right? So we're really good at manifesting the things that we focus on, especially when that focus, is being driven by something that's creating this fear.
Yeah.
So if everybody can look at their genetic testing with a grain of salt as just information, and hey, with this information, now I'll use caution, I'll
Right.
educate myself deeper on this, and I'll make the necessary recommendations. Like with me,
Right.
I'm not at all like I'm completely confident that I will have a happy and healthy brain the rest of my life.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what happened with grandma. It doesn't matter what happened with my mom. It doesn't matter what happened with my brother. It really doesn't matter that I had a seizure disorder either. It matters what I'm doing right now to
Mhm.
keep my body and brain
Right.
where it is.
I like how you say use it as a guide because I think, it can be helpful to know when we have SNPs
Right,
and how to compensate
right.
for it. It's like, oh, that's the issue. This is how I compensate, and then I can, proceed with being more healthy.
Exactly.
One other thing I wanted to point out about the list of medications that you saw that are so common. I mean, these are so commonly prescribed. But antidepressants, also, I wanted to mention that they're really, many of them are used as sleep aids, not because somebody's depressed, but because they have sleep disorder of
Right,
some sort. And there it gets into chronic use. Somebody's being managed for anxiety or depression,
right.
it's being managed a little bit different. It's just like sleep, you could just take this stuff forever. And yeah, quite debilitating for mitochondria beyond things like that for so long.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and even just the whole body. I mean, when we have proper sleep at the proper times and a deep sleep, and that's when the immune system is kicking into high gear to maintain and repair the body. So it's not even just mitochondria, it's everything. So sleep is so important.
Mhm. And before we get it to the supplement questions, I also wanted to mention a question came up about all the lifestyle things we could do. Certainly, high intensity workout exercises, but deep breathing, whether that be, a form of meditation or otherwise, I think, for me, what deep breathing really does is activate the vagus nerve. And
Hmm.
activating the vagus nerve stimulates all of our internal organs and provides energy. So I would think, although I have not seen the science to indicate it, that stimulating the vagus nerve stimulates mitochondria.
Right, right, exactly.
Okay, then.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah. I mean, you're right on. You're right on.
okay. Let's talk about asking you to share your opinion on taking supplement NADH. And just for audience's sake, if you don't know what NADH stands for, it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That's NAD plus the hydrogen molecule. And it's a chemical that occurs naturally in our body, but also plays a role in the chemical process that generates energy.
Exactly. Yeah, I honestly
So
don't
do you have an
have.
opinion on using it?
I don't, it's not anything that I've utilized personally or with my clients. So,
Mhm.
and because of that, I haven't done deep enough research to really have what I would consider a valuable opinion.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll both look into it a little bit after
Yes.
the call and see what this comes up.
Yeah, I definitely know. I hear it all the time referred to, tied into the ATP and energy,
Mhm.
which we're talking
Right.
about with mitochondria as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, if I gave an opinion, I don't feel like it would be an expert opinion.
Okay. Thank you. Can you please tell us again the form of magnesium that you prefer?
I prefer myself personally. I take L-threonate
Mhm.
form of magnesium because of its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and to help stimulate that parasympathetic response in my brain.
Yeah.
In my practice, I use that, or more consistently when it's not specifically just brain related, when it's whole body related. I use something called magnesium somaplex from a company called Marco Pharma, which is a liquid ionized form of magnesium.
Mhm.
That form doesn't have to be broken down by that two-step process in the digestive system to where it is made biochemically active. So I love that form.
Mhm.
I just personally don't take that because I want it more about my brain.
Mhm. Understand. Yeah, I take the 3 and 8 too, but mm, oh, follow-up question on that is when do you take yours? Do you do it in the morning or the evening? Do you take it with food or away?
I,
Your
t- I
minerals
yeah,
specifically?
I take mine typically with food, and I take it with my first meal of the day. Granted, my first meal probably isn't until like 11 a.m.
Mhm.
And some people, magnesium makes them more tired and relaxed. So if that's the case, you could take it with the last meal rather than an earlier meal. And I prefer to take minerals with food as opposed to away from food.
Yeah, yeah, I would suggest that too. Dr. Deanna just posted a beautiful chart on the chronometer, the timeline for
Mm,
when and how to take our nutrients best. And I concurred very much. The science validates it that taking them with food often, and some things earlier in the morning than others would certainly.
yes.
Um, did you your preferred brand for H2 and berberine? What was that?
I use Mercola's, the berberine and the micronized PQQ and the H2. And I like that
Okay,
H2 as
so go to.
compared to others because of, I've used other brands of the H2, except they have to be in a small closed bottle. But
Mhm.
there's been an advancements in the formulas of the H2 where you can actually mix that H2 in an open glass. You just have to drink it just once it dissolves, you drink it then to get the full value of the hydrogen.
Okay, all right, thank you. Um, So is ubiquinol recommended for prevention or treatment? And if enough CoQ10 is included in the diet, is ubiquinol still recommended?
Uh, for the first part of that question, I would say both. Uh,
Mhm.
like I'm using it preventatively, and I'm using high doses. I'm using a pretty aggressive therapeutic dose as prevention. Just because I've got multiple risk factors. And then outside of that, as far as the CoQ10 in the diet, and again, it's it's kind of age and health dependent. If somebody is, again, that magic age is around 30 when we start to recognize the depleted intrinsic factor. And I would say that it's not just about, hey, you turn 30 and my intrinsic factor goes away. It's
Mhm.
more of that. I think, and this is just my own opinion, is I think that the at age of 30 is when we start to get the accumulation of these multiple different chronic functional health issues that are going on that helps generate the reality of the lower intrinsic factor. So I feel that even if we're getting it in nutritionally, CoQ10, whether it be aggressively through nutrition and even CoQ10 supplements, if we don't have the intrinsic factor, we're not getting the conversion from that ubiquinone, which is CoQ10, into ubiquinol, and ubiquinol is closer to that usable factor by the mitochondria.
Right. Okay. One more. Do you have an opinion, or do you use NAC, SAMe, or L-lysine?
I don't, but all quality supplements and reasonably beneficial down this pathway as well.
Sure. For immune support as well.
Yes.
And then circling back onto this deep breathing and how it calms the nervous system, I just wanted to say that do deep breathing and smiling at the same time. You can
Yeah.
become stressed.
Right.
It's hard to say, oh, I'm so stressed with a big smile on your face.
I know. Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up. That's something I've known and forgotten about for the longest time. Because the physiology, we're holistic beings, and the act of a smile stimulates all of the mental and emotional aspect of what a smile is all about. So I used to, and I haven't made this recommendation in years, and thank you for triggering my memory on this, is that I used to tell people, you could take something like something that's like a cylinder, like about the shape of a straw, and put it in your mouth and kind of bite down on it. When you bite down on it, it actually forms a smile. It's like, so if you're kind of down and out and feeling depressed and upset, do something to maintain a smile for a couple minutes, and you'll be amazed at how quickly the physiological aspect changes the mental emotional aspect. So
Right.
I'm so glad you said that. That's like a breath of fresh air from my past.
Right, good. And another further component of it, or proof of it, is that there's science that if you smile when you're having a panic attack, it stops. Panic attacks are fierce. And when they start to come on, that just brings up the fear factor. So our
Right.
adrenaline starts running and things. If you can remember to smile, it will help everything.
Absolutely.
All right. I think that comes to the end of the questions, Glenn. So I think I just loved this presentation, and want to thank you again so much. And I want to let everybody know that we recorded it, and it'll be available on Hawthorn's website under archived webinars in just a few days. And thank you again for your generosity, Glenn, for mentioning for the people that are viewing this not live, and giving them access to be able to ask you questions too. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
There's a survey to fill out after the webinar ends, everybody. It's short, it's just a few questions, and it always helps us to have your feedback or any comments about this presentation series. So I sure appreciate you taking the time for that. I want to let you know that our next webinar is going to be on May 19th. We're going to host Sylvia Haskovitz for a very unique presentation on eating by choice, not by habit, to support the change we want to see in the world. Sylvia's an expert in nonviolent communication, and she connects this to food and the body, especially emotional eating. And so she's going to be sharing her insights on this. It's a really terrific presentation. She's also going to be role-playing with 2 of Hawthorn's graduates. So I think it's just a presentation not to be missed, and you'll learn tools to support your clients and yourself in creating really satisfying relationships with our bodies and our eating, our approaches and our habits and just daily practices. And our next All About Alumni graduate interview is tomorrow, Wednesday, May 6th at 12 noon Pacific time, where I have the pleasure of interviewing our graduate, Nishanga Bliss. She's going to be presenting on her postgraduate activities and accomplishments and challenges. So I'd say this one is a good one to tune into for sure. And we just had so many previous terrific grad interview presentations. So those are all available in our archives as well. And it's one of my favorite things to do at Hawthorn is to showcase our graduates, because the ways that they're using their education is just amazing to me. And they're quite successes, but they're very forthright with what their challenges have been too, and how they've worked through those. So tune in as you can. And I just want to say thank you again. This concludes today's presentation. Glenn, you've been wonderful as always.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for sharing the educational experience together. Wish you all the best of health. Look forward to learning more together, Hawthorn's webinars and our All About alumni, and if you're enrolled. And until then, I'm going to continue tending my mitochondrial health and compassion and happiness, because what we practice grows stronger. So please join me in this too, and meet me back here again. I'll love to have you in attendance. And thanks, everybody. Take good care. It sure matters a lot right now.